today's about sharing out our research, and I have a bunch of questions for you that I'd like to learn from, as well as I'm sure you'll have questions for me. So let's dig in. So we've been thinking about leadership development for 26 years, but in the last few years, there's been this really interesting kind of acceleration in the importance of leadership development. And I've been asking this question recently across the world: how much does leadership need to change? And leadership itself, the answer we're coming back with is leadership itself needs to be quite different, more than 50% different. And the new skills are things like obviously understanding AI, but also really leveraging the upsides of hybrid, dealing with a kind of divided workforce, dealing with people overwhelmed, all sorts of things. But the other 50% of skills that sort of are the same, interestingly, are things like understanding people, motivating people well, managing accountability, which we'll talk about today. These kinds of skills have actually become more important in this kind of overwhelmed world and more hybrid world and all this. These kinds of skills have become more important, but actually harder to execute. So like managing accountability has become like harder to execute. All these kind of foundational skills. It's been really interesting to see that. So we really need a pretty big breakthrough in how we do leadership development. And we've been sharing some ideas out in the last year or so around that. We've built some fascinating new things. Probably the most unexpected and kind of innovative idea is an AI we've built powered up with everything that can give you real-time insights about leadership, as you're being challenged. But anyway, the one of the things we've been learning as we've been looking freshly at leadership is just how consistent these three themes are on screen here. And we're going to dig into accountability, but I'll spend a couple of minutes on the other two. What we're seeing everywhere, and this is around the world, all kinds of organizations, is everyone is saying our leaders need to be more adaptive, more flexible, and need to bring that quality to their people. So in other words, everyone needs more of a growth mindset. And we started working in growth mindset a decade ago. We've done the work with Microsoft and many, many other companies on building that into the culture. But it continues to be a really, really big priority for organizations and for leadership development overall. So any kind of leadership development you do with people, you really want to make sure you're activating this flexible mindset, this adaptive mindset, this ability to help others focus on learning and growth, and really about getting better all the time, not about looking good. So that's growth mindset. Psychological safety, you think of that as like, well, it's almost like inclusion, squared. It's not just people feeling safe and feeling like they're involved. It's actually people like arguing well with each other, and there being positive tension in the team. So there's enough safety that there's actually positive tension for people to challenge each other, challenge ideas, and the best ideas rise to the top. So it's almost like we need more flexibility, but we also need everyone really engaged and really debating. But then we also need to make sure things happen, and that's accountability. And these three might seem disconnected. They're actually very, very connected. And in many ways, accountability, the right kind of accountability, requires these first two, requires growth mindset and psych safety. And so psychological safety without accountability is quite empty, right? If you don't have that real focus on what matters, you're not really going to create psychological safety. So these are very, very connected. I'm going to talk, specifically about accountability, but it's interesting how these three are connected. And pretty much everyone we talk to about leadership development says, look, what matters at the moment is people need to be much more adaptive and flexible. We need to get everyone really engaged, but we really need to make sure things happen. And so we think these three are, really central at the moment. We've woven these into a bunch of new programs we've built. And in particular, we've been really thinking hard about accountability recently. So just published this last month in June in HBR. And if you're registered here, if you're here on the line, or if you just registered and you don't make it, or you're listening later, we'll send you a link to this. You don't have to copy this. But we just published this, and it's come out in HBR, 3 ways to compassionately hold your team accountable. And it's the first time we've shared out our ongoing research on basically how to create more accountability, how to really create accountability. And that's what we're going to dig in today. What are the habits for creating accountability? But let's first of all kind of level set. It's such a fascinating topic. Basically, everyone agrees that accountability is important, and yet everyone struggles with it. That's the cliff note. It's really important, and yet it's something that people really struggle with. But what comes to mind for you when you think about accountability in the workplace? Let's get some comments in the chat. I know we've got quite a few people here. What comes to mind for you when you think about accountability? Like, what does it kind of suggest or explain, or how do you think about accountability? Let's get some comments in the chat. I know we've got, a good group here. Should get some comments here. Doing what you say you'll do, dependability, trust, ownership. I see the word expectations quite a few times. Doing what you say, taking responsibility. Interesting. So there's a lack of it. People are saying trust. Fantastic. Some great comments. Really interesting to see the consistency. Here's a really fun question. What if accountability was not necessarily doing 100% of what you say, because that's, physically impossible. Things sometimes happen, but you're so dependable that you do absolutely what you say, and if not, you absolutely learn from it, and you don't make the same mistake again. Like, you really, when you miss something, you really learn and grow and evolve through it. But here's a question for you. How many people in your network, your work network, your personal network, how many people in your network are the kind of people that you can 100% count on? And think about this before you answer it. How many people can you 100% count on? If they say they're going to do something, they're going to do it. And if they don't, like, there's no way it could have been done, or else they're absolutely going to get it right the second time. So how many people can you absolutely count on to do what they say they're going to do? Let's get a number. Is it 1? Is it 10? Is it 100? Like, how many actual people? We got Ben off the rank with 1, 2, 3, 2, about 5. There's no double figures yet. 2, very few. There's a couple of double figures. Very small number, right? A lot of 1s, a lot of 2s. We're probably averaging around, 4 or something from these numbers, right? It's a very small number of people. These are people that we really, really, really get big things done with, that we really work well with. We know, like, how to work with them. We can do really big things. Some fascinating research. This reminds me of, this a couple of years old now, but they looked at high performers, and they found that a high performer who moves organization actually takes years to get to the same level of performance. So someone's a really, really high performer in one company, moves to another company, their performance plummets for years. It takes them years to get back to that, unless they bring their team with them. Then they hit the ground running. Now, unfortunately, that's illegal in many places and contexts. You can't necessarily do that. But it's really interesting that you actually need the team to execute, but you really don't just need a team. You need the team of people who you absolutely can count on, and you know them really well. So it's really interesting that number is pretty consistent and pretty small. And most people are saying it's, people in their team. But what it does say is it's possible, right? What this does say is it's possible to have this connection with people, and it's possible for, to also train people to do this, right? It's possible to select for this as well. It's really interesting. And I know lots of people on our team that, that have this. Like, we absolutely know that they're going to deliver. And if they don't deliver, they're absolutely going to learn and make sure next time, that we do deliver. So it's a fascinating concept. So one of the first things that we started to do when we started to research accountability is we just, as we always do, before we get into the brand side, we're like, let's do a literature review. Let's see what, academia says about the idea. Let's see if there's anything sort of interesting in the existing literature. Right? That's what we do. Something really, really fascinating jumped out from the existing literature. This isn't our insight. This is something that was out there. But what we found is that there's 2 quite different types of accountability, and different, like, literally mindsets about accountability, right? There's the most common one, which is, you might think of as punitive accountability, right? And this is basically where people think of accountability as, fear, blame, punishment. And it sort of hinders learning in teams and organizations. So this is accountability as like, you got to fire someone if they miss a target, right? That's the general approach to accountability. And a lot of the time when people say, oh, there's no accountability here, what that means is, there are underperformers where there are no, consequences to underperformance in some companies. Right? In some companies, there are huge consequences, almost too quickly for a slight miss in performance, right? Some companies, over-rotate and just, fire people really quickly when anything's wrong. A lot of companies leave, average performers, even poor performers in the system a long, long time. There's not a lot of accountability. And we hear that much more than the other. But generally, accountability is thought of as, if people don't do something, they're out, or they get this, this warning, and making sure that happens. Now, that's not to say that that's a bad thing. And when we look at organizations, pretty much every organization we've ever talked to has said there's some number less than about 5% at any one point. There's some number less than about 5% of employees who basically are not performing, or would be better in another team, or better in another, role completely. They're just not using their strengths, or just shouldn't be in the business, right? So it could be a values fit. It could be, just poor hire or changing conditions. It's really, really interesting. When we studied this years ago, we found there were about 5 to 8 different reasons why someone, is in that 5%. It's not just they're no good, right? There are all these different reasons: extenuating circumstances, change of life, change of job, change of team, all sorts of things. But long story short, about 5% of a company, and some businesses it's 2%, some it's 4 or 5, but about 5% anytime are folks that are really, really underperforming, and the organization, probably should do something about that. It's really interesting. But a lot of the time, systems are built as if that number was 100%, right? And we assume, that a lot of people are not performing, and all sorts of crazy things start to happen. Anyway, I digress. But accountability is not about, let's make sure those 5% or less are getting fired fast. But unfortunately, sometimes we think about that. We think that non-punitive accountability is actually something about everyone. And that's where people think of accountability as an avenue for growth and development, and it's about ownership and learning, right? So in this case, accountability is about ownership and learning, and really like leaning in and being one of those people, right? Being one of those people that's absolutely count onable, right? Those 5 or 6 or 7 people that you absolutely can count on. So it's a really interesting question. Can that be taught, right? Can that be taught? Can we teach people to have that level of accountability? And we think the answer is yes. We think it's possible to actually teach people how to be accountable. In fact, that's our work. Our work is identifying habits at the heart of any domain, if it's inclusion, or if it's allyship, or it's bias mitigation, whatever it is. Our work, core of our work, is defining habits that are teachable, and then looking at how to scale those. So we think accountability is a scalable, like set of habits, or a set of habits that you can scale and teach, and that people can really get much, much, much better at this. And so I'm going to show you through kind of what that looks like and sort of how to do that. I'm just going to have a look at the chat for a moment, just see if there's any sort of questions coming up or comments. We don't share the slides, unfortunately. Sorry about that. But let's have a quick look. It's an interesting comment from Durrani. There's a principle that says 20% of people get 80% of things done. There's an element, high performers often do a lot of work that often outperform in a significant way, but that doesn't mean every performer couldn't be 100% accountable. I think everyone could potentially be that person that's entirely dependable in that way. Let's have a look what else is coming up from just comments from people. Yeah, I think the comment from Claire, who is it up here? Yeah, from Claire, I think it is possible that people can be accountable. I think it is possible to teach it. And I think it is possible to have really clear understanding across the business of what these actually are. So let's dig in. I'm going to share with you our perspective on what they is. So high level, we're going to talk about non-punitive accountability. We're not going to talk about punitive accountability. We're not going to talk about, how do you make sure that 5% are dealt with properly, right? That's different. What we're going to talk about is how do you get everyone to be dependable, right? How do you get everyone, the 95%, to be meaningfully more dependable? That's really the question, meaningfully more dependable. So 3 basic ideas. You want people who are going to say what they'll do and are really clear about that, that they're much more thoughtful about what they're going to do, that they then actually meet those expectations. They really care about those. But then, when things don't go right, they own those, situations, and they actually learn really, really rapidly about how to do better. So that's, high level. Now let's dig into what the science says about this. Let's go a click deeper into this. So we're seeing 3 habits, 3 general habits involved here. Now, this first one is interesting. All 3 of them, to some degree, involve the management of expectations here. And Expectations are really interesting. So the brain is built around expectations. It's built around kind of the creation and the meeting of expectations, right? Music is pleasant when things that you're expecting something to happen, it happens. Life is built around the creation and meeting of expectations. It involves a dopamine release when expectations are met, and a cortisol release when expectations are not met, a threat response. But thinking ahead is something that these dependable people do a lot more deeply, right? Now, what do they do? What does that dependable person do, right? They actually do this thing called mentalizing, right? They're using what's called prospective memory, which is imagining the future, right? And they're actually imagining what would happen when they go to do this task or when they've given this task to another person, either way. Because accountability is about yourself, but it's also about being accountable for others. It's sort of both sides. So what does someone do who's really dependable? They actually imagine the task, right? I got on a plane recently, and I was, up the front, and they had, nice hot towels, and the person handing out the towels didn't imagine the task, didn't see how hot they were, how wet they were, just picked it up, started handing it to me, and the water went, in my laptop. It was not a good day. Like, they didn't picture what could happen as they do the task, right? So they're not putting much care, right? They're mentally elsewhere. They're not imagining the task ahead of them. And you compare that to someone who's really thinking ahead, who's that dependable person. They're actually getting the task and they're picturing what's going to happen. Now, let's bring some science into this. That means they're activating the visual cortex, the occipital lobe at the back of the brain, actually picturing, like pausing and imagining the task happen. Now, that takes caring, right? It takes effort. It takes commitment. And it makes a huge difference when you actually stop and picture it. Personally, this, for me, I relate to this like if I'm in, let's say, the Northern Hemisphere, where I spend a lot of time, and it's summer, but I'm going to winter, as I've just done now. I've actually got to picture being cold in winter in the place to pack correctly. Otherwise, I just pack all these light clothes, right? I've actually got to imagine in my brain, I've got to hold a picture of standing in the cold in Melbourne. Sorry, Melbourneites. I've got to picture standing there, and then suddenly I go, that's right, I should bring a scarf, right? I should bring gloves. I should like make sure I've got this jacket, this kind of things. But if I just like pack without actually picturing being there, I don't get what's called spreading activation, and all the implications come in. So when you picture something, like literally a visual, and you imagine yourself there, right? This is called mentalizing. When you do this, you get what's called spreading activation, and you make all these connections. But to do that, you have to care, right? You have to be interested. You have to be willing. You have to be motivated to a degree. And then you have to take a moment. It could be just a second or two, right? Often it's more. So those people who are really, really dependable, what I see is like I'll give them a task and they'll literally look up and they'll like imagine themselves doing the task, and they'll actually go, oh, okay, that won't work because of this reason. Oh, I'll have to plan ahead for this. I'll have to think about this. But you can see them like imagining the task, right? So it's a very learnable skill, thinking ahead. And it involves like imagining what could go wrong, but it also involves setting accurate expectations, like being really thoughtful about what you do commit to. Let me take some comments. Any reflections or comments on this first habit? Some interesting questions and comments coming in. From Fran, what if it's a totally new thing? So if it's a totally new task that you've never done before, you might want to, check in with someone who's done the task before and see what they can tell you about it, right? Or ask ChatGPT what's involved in this task, or find a way to get some help to think about this. But asking a person or asking AI will really help you to visualize something you've never done before. The spreading activation was the term I was using for try. Spreading activation literally means like you've got a concept and you make connections to other concepts relating to it, right? So spreading activation. So it's activating like a circuit, but all the circuits around that circuit. So you go, let's say, you imagine packing for somewhere cold, and you go, okay, so I need to make sure that I'm not standing out in the cold in between meetings, right? So let me look at my schedule more, right? Let me make sure I've got plenty of food because I'll probably be hungry more when it's cold. So it's like implications of things, and all that. So it's very much visualizing. And I think AI can be super helpful. You could literally ask AI, tell me about all the things that could go wrong when I'm doing, such and such a task. And then, you'll get that help. But also a person or multiple people. Tell me, what it looks like to do this task. Yeah, one of the things we get wrong a lot is just how long things take, right? How long things take. We imagine a project we've never done before is going to take 3 months. It takes 3 years, right? Technology people, a little bit of guilty of this. Oh yeah, this will take, 3 months to embed into the business, but they're assuming that, humans aren't involved and people don't need change management. And suddenly it takes 1.5 years to actually do these things. So you can really check, hey, let's look at 3 other times this project was done. What's happened before? So anyway, thinking ahead, mind mapping is a good metaphor. Imagining all the implications, getting input from AI, getting input from people, but really caring about picturing what's going to happen. And so that's a lot about expectations, making sure you set the right expectations, and that, the expectations that you're going to actually be able to meet. All right, that's habit number 1. Definitely learnable, right? Definitely learnable, especially if you say to people, hey, look, this is a necessary step. And what's really fun is to teach accountability where you just teach this step and get people to practice just this step for a week. Teach that. You can teach this to, leaders on a Zoom session, going deep into the science as well as storytelling, even deeper in the science than we have here. Really, really understand what this looks like and how to do it. Get them practicing it in situations. You'll get a radical difference in how well they think ahead. Just from spending one Zoom session on this, it will really make a difference. So you can get a lot of momentum on building these habits if you really do them one at a time and then take a week to practice. But let's look at the second one. Second one is own your commitments. Now, when you dig into the science of expectations, it's really interesting. And I think this is some of the science that's really influential, as we teach this. What's influential here is when you have an expectation that's here, like, you're going to deliver, a page at 5 o'clock Friday, and you beat that expectation, like you deliver, a page at 4 o'clock Friday, you get this nice little reward response in the brain. So, beating expectations is nice. But when you expect it at 5 o'clock Friday and you get it at 6 o'clock Friday, instead of a similar, like, low level, you get a big drop, right? A really big drop. So missed expectations are much more painful than beaten expectations are rewarding, right? And met expectations, slightly rewarding. It's quite nice, but you don't really pay attention. You pay attention when someone beats an expectation. That's nice. You're like, oh, that's really nice. But you really pay attention when someone misses an expectation. And in the brain, when you look at what happens here, in the brain, it's really a thing, right? You get an error response. You get this really big error in the brain that says, hey, this person doesn't do what they say, so be careful about what you give them. And it only takes one of these that it starts to, this starts to happen. And, we've all heard 1,000 times, exceed expectations, but it really is a thing in terms of collaborating with people and, in the workplace. We want to know what the expectations are, and we want to really, at the very minimum, meet them. So this goes back to thinking ahead. Make sure you're really thoughtful about the expectations that you make, right? And a lot of people are quite sloppy with this. Like, oh, I want this on Friday. Well, what time Friday, right? And what format Friday? And what time zone Friday? So getting really thorough about that expectation setting stage is also really important. So owning your commitments is about understanding the importance of meeting expectations, and creating these expectations with others. A lot of this is about dopamine, what happens when expectations are met, what happens when they're not met, and the way we kind of reclassify people. It really only takes a couple of times expectations are missed when we really reclassify people in a different way. Yeah, let's see some comments coming in. Love to hear from you. What is this suggesting? What does it remind you of? Other domains of research? What's released in the brain when expectations are not met? I mean, depends on the scenario, but it's a threat response. You're getting an error signal. So you're getting a small amount through to a large amount, depending on the topic of cortisol released. You might get a little bit of adrenaline, making you like focus, but you're getting a drop in dopamine. You're getting reduced positive neurochemicals, and you're getting an increase in threat chemicals. So, things like cortisol, adrenaline, that's basically reminding you. The adrenaline will remind you this, like, don't do this again, like, be careful of this person, and the cortisol will be like, oh, be careful, there's a danger here. So really, in a really smaller way, even small expectations not met can be really quite big. It's the little things, and there's this quite controversial blog years ago now, but in HBR, about this guy saying why he won't hire people with poor grammar, or poor spelling. And if they're not thinking about that stuff, they're not going to think about complex stuff. If they're not caring enough in a job application to be really accurate, what are they going to be like doing work, right? And it's a little bit like that. If someone's not caring about being accurate with timing and accurate with details, if they're not being accurate and thorough, can you really trust them with bigger things? So a lot of this is about setting really clear agreements, meeting those agreements. If you're trying to build relationship with others, you want to continue to set expectations and meet them, set expectations and meet them all the time, and recognize that when expectations are not met, that people get a threat response, and that leaning in and addressing that. But that brings us to habit number 3. What do we do when we miss that? So let's have a look. Habit number 3, anchoring on solutions. So what's this about? This is about creating the conditions to debate things, to learn from things, to be really focused on solutions instead of blame. So at an individual level, this is about you fessing up and saying, hey, I missed this. I didn't manage this properly, but this is what I've learned. This is what I'm going to do next time. It's also about getting really, really creative, about making sure you hit your targets, although that's a bit of own your commitments. But here, what we're looking at is, do we like clean up like a commitment that was missed? Do we come back and clean it up? Do we say, hey, I know I should have done that. I know I didn't deliver what I said. I apologize. This is what I've learned. This is what I'm going to do next time, and then do that. Because those, half a dozen people you count on, they don't deliver 100% of what they say. Like, they miss things sometimes, but that they know, and that they will not do that same mistake again, right? And so accountability isn't about being perfect. It's actually about doing your best, putting the work in, and really learning when things don't go as planned. So that's really important. Yeah, any comments on this one? Lots of comments coming into this. Melanie's talking about bias. And it's an interesting one. So neurodiversity is, come up a few times in the chat. Neurodiversity is something that more and more on people's minds. People do, process the world very differently. Actually, everyone processes the world very individually. No two people read the same sentence the same way, using the same brain network with the same understanding. We all process differently. Some people process very differently, and have a different relationship to social interactions, different relationship to social commitments, all sorts of things. So, there is literally a spectrum as it relates to social interactions. There's a spectrum as it relates to emotional intensity. There's all sorts of things. So, as you're dealing with accountability, you do want to be thinking about the individuals' needs, the individual's abilities in this. The other thing is bias comes up a lot, and I mentioned it here in the first habit. Bias does come a lot. We have one of the common biases is an expedience bias. Expedience is one of the 5 big categories of bias as we defined them in the SEEDS model. SEEDS is similarity, expedience, experience, distance, and safety. If you don't know the framework, my team can throw something in the chat on that. But the SEEDS model describes the 5 categories of bias. Super, super helpful for identifying what kind of bias might be happening. With accountability, there's a lot of expedience bias going on. That would be the first one. So there's a lot of just not kind of clicking down and really thinking properly. The good news about that is that's one of the few biases you can actually address by trying harder. It's literally one of the only you can address by trying harder. And so there'll be a lot of just assuming, oh, that project took 3 months, so let's just assume this project, which is slightly similar, will take 3 months. Suddenly you're not accountable, doesn't work. So expedience bias will be really, really common. And you can see someone having expedience bias. You can just tell that they haven't done the mentalizing, right? When you give someone a task, they've just said yes without thinking. They haven't looked up, they haven't paused and thought and really, or taken the time. So that would be an expedience bias. There's also an experience bias. Experience bias is, someone's done something many, many times. They just assume it's going to be the same. The way to mitigate experience bias is you actually need other perspectives. So you really need to draw on multiple perspectives to mitigate that bias. But, we also have distance bias, plays out a lot. We just don't think well when things are at a distance. I notice this a lot working globally. I'll talk about a project in another part of the world and people's eyes glaze over a bit because it's just harder to think about things far away. And so we'll often make cognitive errors about those projects and those people because they just feel far away. So distance bias, can play out. And of course, safety bias can play out as well. Safety bias in terms of sort of over focusing on the risk and not thinking about opportunity, that can play out as well. So Seeds is a really helpful tool. We published it in 2015, so it stood the test of time, and a really powerful framework for addressing all kinds of decision making. So people decisions and business decisions of all types. So it gives you a language like SCARF does for motivation and emotions. Seeds as a language for decision making and bias. So yeah, this is the framework. We think there are 3 broad habits. We've woven this into a solution called Deliver, the neuroscience of accountability. Deliver has 3 habits: think ahead, own your commitments, anchor on solutions. These 3 we believe are best learned one at a time. So spend a week learning about thinking ahead, really understanding the science, getting your head around it, making a commitment to practice it, come back the next week, look at the deeper science of own your commitments. Again, think about that, make plans, go away, practice them. And then the 3rd week. And, spending 3 55-minute sessions on this, 3 hours sounds like a lot, but 3 virtual sessions on this, you'd get some really, really, really big changes in people's ability to be that dependable person, but also to create others being that dependable person. So someone who goes through this will know how to help others be really dependable as well. So that's the big idea. Deliver is one new solution. These are the current 15 solutions we've had. We haven't launched a new one for a while, but Deliver is a new one. You can put this into a pathway, maybe starting with growth mindset, and then connect and then deliver, or you can just go straight to Deliver. But it's a completely new solution from us. We are ready to start delivering this, and we can start with one, cohort, customize this a little bit for you, and then scale it. But it's now ready to deliver. So let me go back to this page. What would you like to dig into? We've got a little bit of time. What questions do you have? Questions, comments? Let's see what's coming in. Interesting question from Lawrence. So we always think about priorities, habits, and systems. What I've shown you is the habits, right? But there's really priorities, habits, and systems. And I haven't talked much about the sort of how you make accountability a priority or the systems involved, but definitely it's something that you need to anchor on and kind of decide as an organization you're focusing on. The systems side of things, how do you ensure this kind of accountability? There's a real tendency as you think about systems to accidentally focus on punitive accountability, right? You think about systems, you're like, okay, how do we make sure people do this, right? You got to be careful a little bit because you want to have systems that encourage a growth mindset. So, one of the systems, for example, we have is mistake of the month, right? In APAC and around the world, we get together when we have our meeting about once a month. We have what we call mistake of the month. Someone shares out a really dumb thing that they did in front of the rest of the team. We learn from that. We actually compete for the dumbest thing, and it actually helps creating accountability in terms of everyone seeing that mistakes happen, and we can own up to them and talk about them. One of the best kind of protocols or systems for accountability is actually asking for feedback. It's a really, really interesting habit because it's a habit for accountability, but it's also a habit for growth mindset. It really activates a growth mindset, asking for feedback, but it also creates a lot of psychological safety. So it creates a sense of trust. So what do I mean by asking for feedback? Like maybe one person once a week, you say, hey, tell me something I'm doing well that I should keep doing. So we don't get enough positive feedback. Tell me something I'm doing, I should keep doing, and tell me something maybe I should do differently in the future, right? And then really listening. So asking for feedback increases your accountability because you actually know what's happening. You know what impact you're having on others, right? And you're really interested in learning. So it's a really fantastic way of systematizing the increasing of accountability. So getting everyone asking for feedback from one person once a week, really, really powerful tool for accountability. But again, for the right kind of accountability, because you want non-punitive accountability. You want accountability, that involves learning. But here's the question: like, how do you get from 5 people that being super dependable to just about everyone being super dependable? It's a really interesting question, isn't it? How do you do that? How do you scale that? And I think it's it's one of those things you probably want to do somewhat top down, but actually get out to everyone pretty quickly. It should be a skill that everyone in the organization is working on at the same time, not blaming one part of the business or seeing it as one part of the problem. But I would say, like all things that matter, you should be introducing this skill to all people managers in a relatively short amount of time, and getting everyone working on this, which is really important. A couple other questions coming in, and around unsolicited feedback. We love solicited feedback. Unsolicited feedback, challenging. Solicited feedback is about half as stressful for the giver and the receiver. So half as stressful is a really big thing because feedback's generally very, very stressful, right? But when you actually ask for feedback, it's about half as stressful for people, which makes it much more engaging. I've got a couple of articles. Veronica's asking about seeds and scarf. There's a fantastic article called Managing with the Brain in Mind. My team can put it in the chat, or you can just Google it. Managing with the Brain in Mind. It walks you through scarf in a really kind of readable way. And there's another piece in the same journal called Strategy and Business, called Beyond Bias. So if you put Beyond Bias, Strategy and Business, you'll find that, or Managing with the Brain in Mind, Strategy and Business, you'll find that. And both of those tools, Scarf and Seeds, are things that we license to organizations, and then we can give you tons of tools to really embed that and apply that. Some other good things coming in. Oh, interesting comment from Marin. In hospitals, they have this in hospitals. Look at what went wrong. Yeah, really interesting area. And hospitals and obviously airplanes are things where when things go wrong, there's really high cost things go really, really bad. And there's a colleague who's put a black box recorder into operating rooms in the last few years. He's been working on it for decades, but he put interestingly, he put all the technology to capture everything in an operating room, and all the voice, all the audio, video, all the technology, all the data from the technology, but also they're wiring the doctors and nurses up, and they were actually looking at all the data from people. And they get about 1 million data points per day per operating room. Really, really interesting. The most dangerous time in an operating room is actually a quiet time. So the most dangerous situation is a quiet operating room. When people are not talking much, that's when things go really wrong. The other more dangerous time is actually when people are talking too much, when there's like gossip and distraction and this kind of thing. But really, really interesting. My team can put the podcast in the chat that we did with that. It was a whole session with the founder of that idea. Really, really interesting. And in fact, what you hear in that interview is really growth mindset and psychological safety and accountability kind of coming alive. Because he was able to look at like new habits that operating rooms need to make sure these things don't happen again. So they started to put protocols, but interesting how how they applied that and all the kind of challenges that they learned. All right, some good questions coming in. Got a couple more minutes, and then I'll hand back to Jeff for some announcements. But to Michelle's question, the think ahead, yeah, it's like a pre-mortem. Like it's imagining everything with less bias. The think ahead is like removing bias wherever possible. It's about imagining things more accurately, maybe imagining from other people's perspectives, and getting this spreading activation of actually picturing what will really happen when you do the task, right? You see someone, take on a task often, they just don't think about what will really happen. You'll say to a friend, hey, let's meet at 7. They'll be like, oh, no problem. I finished work at 6. And you realize that they're in New York and it's the middle of the fall. It's like, it's an hour and a half to get anywhere in New York in the fall. Like you're not going to be there. You see this a lot, people just not thinking through accurately what it's actually going to take to do things. So I think that's probably the biggest muscle and easiest to learn muscle, is just like intentionally thinking ahead. The second muscle to really build, and I'll go back to the one someone asked about, the second muscle to really build is about really caring about those expectations being met. So, so making sure that those expectations are met, kind of no matter what, getting flexible, getting creative, finding a way. And then the third habit is really about kind of owning up when you've missed something and really leaning in and learning this. So yeah, so that's what we're seeing. It very, very learnable. If you're interested in talking to one of us about a rollout of Deliver, just put the word Deliver and your company name in the chat. Someone will follow up with you this week. So just put Deliver and your company name, and we'll get to you. We can talk about a pilot of that with one group, or we can go straight to lots of people. But we're now starting to roll out a Deliver in that way. All right, let's see if there's any other questions coming in. Can every individual be made more accountable? What about if there are some people? I mean, people have to want to be dependable. If someone does not want to be dependable, you want to ask if they're a good fit for the business, right? Because the more dependable people that you have, the more smooth your organization is going to be. Now, creative people can still be dependable, right? It's not about following exact timelines, but it's about, being that dependable person. And I think, folks who are not dependable, you have to decide if they really are a good fit, for your organization. Another question, what if expectations are unrealistic? I mean, that expectation setting time is really important. Like that time that think ahead time is really, really important, that you really accurate with that. That you don't set expectations that can't be delivered. It's a really important thing. Let's see if there are any other questions. Yeah, interesting question. Someone's asking about folks on the spectrum, on the autism spectrum, and they tend to be, apologies, this is a generalization, they tend to be, quite concrete, quite logical, very, very concrete, very tangible. And so I think there's no reason that they couldn't be, very dependable. Sometimes they might be the most dependable people. If you're really concrete and clear, in the dynamic, there's no reason they couldn't be, very, very highly dependable. All right, some very good questions coming in, insights. Is Deliver open to the public? Not yet, but we'll probably do that pretty quickly. We've built a platform called a habit activation platform. We're slowly putting our solutions. I'll tell you what is available is that the habits inside Deliver are inside our Lead solution. And Lead is a 6-month digital experience, but in a cohort. Lead is now available for the public. It has that work on accountability in it. It has manage yourself, mobilize others, drive results. So it has 3 modules, 2 months each, really going into the science. So you'll have an opportunity to learn the habits of accountability. My team can put the link to that in the chat as well. Lead is a fantastic solution for individuals and whole organizations to do leadership development much deeper, faster, more scalable, and cheaper all at the same time. Let me wrap up with a couple of resources following up. If you're interested in any of these solutions, put solutions in the chat. Someone from our team will follow up. If you're interested in any of these, just put solutions in the chat, separate to the Deliver program. But these solutions are available, now in many, many formats and very, very deliverable. So I see a couple of folks putting solutions in the chat, and our team can talk to you about that. Couple of quick announcements. Let me go to Lead, where I've got it somewhere here. There we go. So Lead is available now. It's gone to some amazing organizations. It's a way of doing scalable leadership development. The work on accountability is woven into this. It also has an amazing AI that's powered up with all our work. So in real time, you can ask questions about anything to do with leadership. Super, super powerful. So anyone interested in Lead, just put the word Lead in the chat. We will follow up with you on that. But that's now ready to go. You can pilot that yourself, test that yourself. You can jump in and actually, be part of the Lead experience already. So that's up and running, and we've started to roll that out into organizations as well. Otherwise, I think, Jeff, I'll hand to you for some closing announcements. Otherwise, thanks everyone very much for being here. Appreciate the opportunity to share. I'll go back to some of those other announcements for you, Jeff, and I'll let you wrap up. Thanks so much, everyone. Appreciate the opportunity to share all this with you. Bye-bye.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, David. And thank you, everyone, for attending today. Lots of really great ideas. If you want to discuss more of those concepts around accountability, those habits, please reach out to us. Either drop in your details, or we'll follow up by email in the next day or so. So always happy to have a conversation about how to bring those habits alive in your organization. As Dave said, there's a rich catalog of podcasts and blogs on Your Brain at Work on our website. Go ahead and subscribe to that to hear some amazing stories on that. There's a great discussion with David and Dr. Amy Edmondson from Harvard about accountability and psych safety. So some really great resources there for you. On the next one, we've got brain-based coaching coming up, particularly if you're across the region, lots of virtual intakes, but also a in-person cohort in Singapore in just a couple of weeks' time, from the 14th to the 16th of August. There are a few places left if you're in Southeast Asia and would love to join us to that. It's a really amazing program to learn not just some of the core concepts around our SCARF model and other things that David has talked about today, but really bringing coaching conversation skills to your leadership group. Next, let's another sort of great education for you if you want to learn the deeper science about what we do. We have the certificate in the Foundations of NeuroLeadership. This is a 6-month virtual program led by our amazing professors to really get into the nuts and bolts of what's going on in the brain. And just finding out just a couple of things. Yeah, as David Lee had said, reach out to us about LEAD. We've got a couple of public cohorts starting shortly. There's rolling cohorts every a couple of months, but also cohorts here in APAC time zone for you. And we're always hosting sort of our in-person events. It's lovely to be back post-pandemic, doing a lot more in-person talent leader exchanges, mini summits. As David said, he's been in Australia, across Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne, doing our leadership skills, leadership development mini summit topic. So if you'd love to be part of that, host one of our small events, roundtables, etc., please use that QR code or reach out to us following this session. I think that's all we have time for. Yes, just one last mention of our upcoming full global summit coming up 29th and 30th of October. It will be full virtual and global. So we'll be having sessions timed across the APAC time zones. We know it's often hard to get involved in these sort of global events. So we're trying to make that really inclusive globally. So our topic this year is Evolve, looking at, change is inevitable, but adaptation is not. So really how do organizations grow and evolve and continue to adapt as change is the new normal. As a last thing, just how can we help? Always happy to share our research and have a conversation about how to bring these topics and habits to life in your organization. So there's a poll on your screen if you'd like us to follow up on certain aspects. We have a great corporate membership program to access all of our journal articles, case studies, and tons of resources, which is a great tool for your HR team to learn more about. Reach out to us in any way, and we'll connect that and hopefully speak to you soon. Again, thank you for your time. It's always I'm always very pleased to see how many people take time out of their day to join us for these sessions. And again, thank you for David for sharing those insights. In a couple of weeks' time, our next topic will be a replay of one of our summit sessions from last year. So keep an eye out in our follow-up for information about that. That's all. We'll stay on the line if there's got any final questions that we might be able to answer, or research that we would like to you'd like us to share with you. Otherwise, have an amazing day and hope to speak to you again soon. Goodbye.